Welcome back to Murder on Record, where every case is etched in blood and the truth is buried in the fine print. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we dig through the dusty files, the overlooked evidence, and the whispered testimonies to bring long-forgotten crimes back into the light.
Today, we're plunging into a particularly disturbing case out of Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah, this one is, it's pretty grim.
It is. It's the murder of 73-year-old Deborah Hatley by her 42-year-old daughter, Carol.
And the detail that really jumps out right away.
Exactly. What makes this case so immediately gripping is that detail. That when police arrived at the home on July 30th, 2012, they found Deborah's body. Well, in the process of being dismembered.
It's just horrific, an incredibly shocking starting point.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've compiled a detailed account summarizing the police reports and court information we could access. We want to really try and understand the crucial element.
Right, piece together what actually happened. Our mission here is to dissect what happened, to, rigorously explore the many questions that are still sort of lurking beneath the surface of these reports, and maybe consider the broader implications of such a brutal act.
And it's a case where that initial shock, the partial dismemberment you mentioned, it really opens up some deeply unsettling questions, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's not just a gruesome detail. It could point to, well, underlying psychological stuff, or maybe just a frantic, panicked attempt to deal with the aftermath.
Right, like concealment, or something else entirely.
Exactly. We need to keep that question in mind as we go through the information we have.
Okay, so let's start with that discovery itself. July 30th, 2012. A day in Phoenix that turns incredibly dark. Police get alerted to a home.
Yeah, and interestingly, the call wasn't directly from Carol Hatley.
No, that's a key point. It came from a neighbor. And apparently, Carol herself had told this neighbor to call the cops.
Which is strange, isn't it, after committing such an act?
Very. So law enforcement arrives, and the scene they walk into is, by all accounts, just horrific. Deborah Hatley's body, mid-dismemberment, it's a really stark image to even try and process.
Yeah, and that neighbor's involvement, it does raise immediate questions like, what was Carol like when she spoke to them? Was she calm? Panicked? Was it like a confession or maybe a plea for help or something else?
We don't really know the specifics of that interaction from the sources, do we?
No, not really. But that moment, however brief, it could offer a really crucial glimpse into her state of mind right after the crime.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Okay, let's focus on the people involved. We have Deborah Hatley, the victim, 73 years old, living in her Phoenix home.
Right.
Then her daughter, Carol Hatley, 42 at the time, the one who committed the murder.
And the detail that keeps coming up in the reports about Carol is her history with alcoholism.
Yes, it's mentioned repeatedly.
Yeah.
Court documents, summaries. They consistently highlight it as a potentially significant factor here.
A major part of the context, it seems.
And then, of course, there's the unnamed neighbor. The person who actually made that call to the police.
A pivotal role, really. Without them, who knows how long it might have taken.
True. But while we know about Carol's alcoholism, the reports don't really detail its specific impact, do they?
Not in depth. I mean, was it a long-term struggle? Had it been getting worse recently? Were there, previous incidents or warning signs in the house?
Yeah, those are crucial details that just aren't fully spelled out in the summaries we have.
It leaves a bit of a gap in understanding the lead-up.
Okay, let's try and piece together the timeline as presented in these sources. So, leading up to July 30th, 2012, Carol and Deborah are living together. And the information suggests Carol's drinking problem, her dependency on alcohol, had been getting worse around that time.
Which hints at, well, a potentially tense or volatile situation brewing.
Right. Then, on July 30th itself, the murder happens. Sometime that day, Carol kills her mother.
And then begins the dismemberment.
Yes. It was after starting that horrific process that she apparently contacts the neighbor and tells them to call the police.
That sequence is quite something, the act. Then starting the dismemberment, then initiating contact.
It is. The very next day, July 31st, Carol's arrested and charged. Reports from that time really emphasize the grim details, especially the tools found at the scene.
The dismemberment tools, yeah.
The timeline sort of wraps up later, post-2012, with Carol getting sentenced to 22 years in prison.
And that's another area where details are sparse, right? Like any parole information, how she's doing in the system.
Exactly. That information isn't readily available publicly, it seems.
The timeline really underscores how quickly things moved after the murder itself. But that fact that she contacts the neighbor after starting the dismemberment, What was she thinking then?
What was the intent? Was it a genuine, like, I need to face this moment?
Or something else entirely? It's hard to say.
Looking at the evidence and the legal side, the sources confirm physical evidence at the scene. The tools, obviously.
Right, and blood spatter patterns,
Yeah.
indicating a violent event.
But what's really interesting, legally speaking, is the charge. Prosecutors went for second-degree murder,
Yeah, not first degree.
which often means they believe the killing was intentional, but maybe they couldn't prove it was premeditated, planned in advance.
Right. There might have been doubt about whether she formed the intent before the act itself.
So the final outcome we know is that 22-year prison sentence handed down in Arizona State Court.
And that choice of charge, second degree, it is significant. It suggests the investigators, the prosecutors, based on what they found, couldn't definitively say, okay, this was planned out.
Yeah, it leaves the door open for the idea that the violence was maybe more impulsive,
Perhaps fueled by the alcohol, the situation in the house at that moment, something snapped.
which brings us right to the motives and theories, or rather the lack of clear ones. The sources consistently point back to Carol's alcoholism as this major background factor. Not an excuse, obviously, but presented as key context.
It's the main element highlighted.
But what's striking is what seems to be missing. There's no mention in these reports of typical motives, like financial gain,
Right, or like a long history of documented abuse between them. Nothing like that emerges.
which kind of suggests maybe a more sudden, less understandable eruption of violence.
Possibly. It steers away from those more common, albeit still awful, motivations we sometimes see.
And then, of course, we circle back to the dismemberment, that deeply disturbing element.
Yeah.
Our sources kind of float two potential ideas, though they're not official explanations. One, a desperate attempt to hide the crime.
Which seems, well, partial dismemberment isn't a great concealment strategy, is it?
Doesn't seem very effective, no.
Yeah.
The other idea, maybe it was a manifestation of some severe psychological disturbance right after the killing.
A complete break from reality, perhaps?
But the key thing is, the material we have doesn't give an official explanation for why she started doing that. It just leaves this really unsettling ambiguity.
And that lack of a clear motive beyond the alcoholism context, that's really central here, isn't it?
It feels like the core unanswered question.
Because while alcohol can absolutely lower inhibitions, impair judgment, fuel aggression, it doesn't easily explain the specific calculated act of dismemberment.
No.
So those two possibilities you mentioned, concealment or psychological breakdown, they lead us down very different mental paths, right?
Really different implications.
Concealment, even if panicked and poorly done, suggests some kind of rational, albeit horrifying thought process.
Right, trying to deal with the situation.
But if it was a psychological disturbance, it points to maybe a profound mental collapse happening right then and there.
And it's in that ambiguity that all these lingering questions just hang there. We're left wondering about Carol's actual mental state, not just the alcoholism, but her overall psychological health.
And the relationship dynamics. What were those day-to-day interactions like with her mother?
Was there underlying tension? Conflict that just wasn't captured in these official reports? We don't know.
And the tools themselves, you mentioned them being found.
Yeah, the specifics raise questions too. Were they just, ordinary household items readily available?
Or were they something acquired beforehand? Which would then circle back to the premeditation question, potentially contradicting that second-degree charge.
It's another frustrating gap.
Yeah.
And even that interaction with the neighbor, it remains so vague in the telling.
Yeah. What exactly did she say? What was her tone? Her emotional state?
Without those details, it's hard to fully grasp her mindset in those immediate moments after the killing. Just significant gaps in our understanding.
And these unanswered questions, they really just highlight the limits of relying solely on these kinds of summarized reports, don't they?
They really do.
Without getting access to, say, full witness interviews, any mental health evaluations that might have been done, or more detailed crime scene analysis, we're just left with this incomplete, kind of fragmented picture.
Yeah.
It really shows how much can stay hidden, even in cases that seem, on the surface, quite shocking and straightforward.
So, thinking about the broader context, what does this case tell us? Several unsettling themes kind of bubble up. I mean, this tragedy, it does spotlight the potential vulnerabilities when elderly parents live with adult children who are struggling with severe addiction.
It's a stark reminder, sadly, of how those situations can escalate.
A really somber reminder of potential domestic dangers. And Within the whole true crime world, this case feels relatively obscure, doesn't it?
It does. Compared to some other more famous matricides, it hasn't gotten the same level of attention, maybe because of that lack of a clear narrative or easily understood motive.
That could be it. And finally, just reflecting on the legal system's view here in Arizona, that second-degree charge does suggest a sort of legal acknowledgement that this was complex, that proving clear, pre-planned intent was difficult.
Right. It shows the challenge the legal system faces in determining intent, especially when things like addiction or potential mental health crises are involved. It moves us beyond just the horror to think about societal issues, family dynamics under pressure.
Yeah, the devastating impact of addiction, the vulnerability of the elderly, the difficulty of proving intent legally. This case brings all that into sharp focus.
It really does.
And finally, just thinking about the source material itself, the reports we drew from, what can we glean from their tone and structure?
Well, what struck me was how neutral and clinical the tone generally is.
Very factual. Sequence of events.
Exactly. It lays out the timeline, the basic facts, but without really diving into the emotional side or personal perspectives much.
The focus feels heavily weighted towards the forensic stuff, right? The physical evidence.
Yeah, much more than any deep psychological exploration of Carol or Deborah or their relationship.
And structurally, as we've kind of been saying all along, there are clear limitations.
Definitely.
The lack of detailed family history, no direct witness quotes beyond that initial neighbor contact mention,
Yeah.
no real insight from the sentencing hearing. It just leaves these big holes.
Yeah, you really feel those missing pieces.
It genuinely feels like we're trying to put together a puzzle, but some crucial pieces are just not in the box.
And that clinical nature of the reporting, while it gives us the basic facts, it does limit how much we can truly grasp the human cost and the underlying complexities here.
Right.
That focus on forensics over psychology is pretty common in initial reports, but it leaves anyone looking for deeper understanding with a lot of unanswered questions.
It really highlights the need for more comprehensive investigation, maybe, or reporting, to truly shine a light on these really dark events.
Absolutely.
So as we try to make sense of this horrific puzzle, we're just left with these profound uncertainties, aren't we?
We really are.
What truly motivated Carol to kill her mother? What was the reason, however disturbed or panicked, behind starting the dismemberment?
And what was her precise state of mind in those awful hours before, during, and immediately after the murder?
These questions just linger.
And they're exactly what makes this case so deeply unsettling. It underscores the limits, of ever fully understanding why extreme violence happens.
Yeah.
Even with the facts we have, the inner workings of someone's mind, the specific triggers, they often just remain shrouded in darkness.
So this deep dive into the case of Carol and Deborah Hatley really leaves us thinking about that terrifying crossroads of addiction, broken family dynamics, and just the eruption of unimaginable violence. It forces you to consider the unseen pressures, the breakdowns that might lead to something so devastating.
Yeah.
And it shows that even in cases that might seem, maybe on the surface, to have a straightforward narrative, daughter kills mother, there are often layers of profound, disturbing questions hidden just beneath the known facts.
Always more beneath the surface.
Until next time, stay curious
Yeah.
and keep your eyes on the evidence.